Representative Perret again makes a motion that the PCS be before the committee. Thank you, Representative Perret. And Representative Brody, the floor is yours to present your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. This came out with a favorable report from what was it, Health Environment Committee, but we had a little bit of controversy on it. So you'll be pleased to know it went from a 13-page bill to a 5. And the reason is it's not that I didn't want to pursue what we sought after. I think we're into a very intense session. So I think that should wait till next year if we're going to pursue that. So, but I'd like to go through what we have left here, and it's basically 3 provisions that that we're dealing with. This deals with sedimentation control, permitting requirements, and efficiency in it. So first of all, I want to start out. If you look at page 2, is the first section, which is section 1A. And page 2, which would be number 3. This is dealing with what's called permanent ground cover for a home being built and being allowed to zero out or eliminate what's called an NCG01 permit, which is an erosion control permit. And as of for as long as I can remember, I had a document in my hands. The DEQ showed that seed and straw are considered permanent ground cover according to the document from DEQ, which we had always assumed that come from EPA, which they work real closely with this. As of 2:30 yesterday, I was informed that that's no longer true. So this part here says that we need to follow that document, and so with conversations with DEQ, it's too late to pull this out, but yet we are going to be working on the potential fix to this. So I wanted to let everybody know that even if you vote for this and it becomes law, it's not law. So we do have to go and fix this. But it's a real important subject and can be very expensive and add to the cost of housing. The second provision would be on page 3, and this deals with the NCG01, which is a erosion control permit, and the local sedimentation and erosion control permit. So basically in 2019 the EPA decided to add a new permit for all of us, which is the NCG01, where originally we had the local sedimentation and erosion control permit. And a couple of years ago we put limitations on fees, etc., and limitations on what that permit can be involved, but it's still, it still worked well. But now EPA requires that we do both. And so because they're basically exactly the same permit, although EPA asks for a few extra things, we sat around and scratched our head and said, well, why don't we just make the NCG01 our permit, single document permit, and so we can cover all those bases so we don't have to be redundant and everything. And through that process, the NCG01 requires a $100 fee to the state. The local is usually, we put a maximum of $100 on it. So I said, okay, the locals can issue this permit, let them get their $100, state will get their $100, it's $200, and everything's a done deal. What this says is that we are asking EPA for permission to be able to do that. And that we don't have a disagreement with DEQ on. It's just basically the way you go about doing that. But we want to make a point that this is very important. If we're going to reduce some redundancy, let's go ahead and try to reduce that. The third one begins on page 3, way at the bottom, and extends on page 4, which is dealing with what's called grading permits. Now, grading permit, usually it's a fee for you set up a grading program if you're going to develop something, and with the locals, and they charge you a fee to do that. Once again, the redundancy factor is that NCG01 is a grading permit. It's the exact same thing. You have to document what you're going to do, or even if you're doing it on a grander scale for a subdivision, for example, you still have to document what your grading is going to look like and then get the permit. So what we're saying is that if we're going to require an NCG01 for disturbing the land, that we eliminate the grading permit and the fee for the grading permit, because it's basically redundant. If there is an instance where there's grading that doesn't require an NCG01, well, then the local government still has the ability to issue a grading permit. And at the very end, we have two kind of pretty benign things, but yet it's important to note that this is section 2, that we ask that EPA inform DEQ of future changes coming up. So as I quote in here, so the state may have the opportunity for meaningful collaborative input on developing of regulations. And then section 3 is that if there's an agreement between EPA and DEQ, that this becomes a public document and at least given it to, I put it on Land Development Committee, I get a little partial to that committee. But nonetheless, it can be directed to anybody. But when I first sought after that original agreement document, we had to search high and low to finally get it, and DEQ was kind enough to get it, but it took a while. So now these things will all be for public viewing. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.
Okay. Representative Belk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is a question for the bill sponsor. So you were talking about the ground cover, and that's what you were saying, that you were just found out in that, even though it's in here. So what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong because this is kind of new, is that right now 80%, when you disturb something, 80% of that has to be what you were talking about, doing the grass and doing the, but that is above what the EPA is asking. They said that there's only 70%. But from what I understand, that the reason that we are putting it at 80%, the EPA has allowed us to not do some of the rules that they have said that we could, that is necessary. So by changing that, we might be subject to the things that we are now exempt from because we have a higher standard. Is that what you understand?
You are absolutely correct. The key to it is because we just found out about this.
Wait a minute, write that down.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Good thing you're sitting down.
Yeah. And that's a mouthful, but yes, that's what we had, and that's what the DEQ came in. I met with Representative Zinger in his office with DEQ, and they brought that forward and they explained it. And of course, this morning, doing my research also, I found that same information. So for years, we've been going by the DEQ published document, and then now at the last minute, it's changed, which is fine. All I'm saying is it's changed so quickly that we couldn't change it in here, but we will be changing that where it goes on to next, which is, I think it's to finance or rules, yeah. Yeah, so that's basically it, yeah.
I'm sorry, follow up. So just so I understand, so that's going back to 80%, and so that we don't have to be concerned with that.
That's correct. That's what DEQ currently has.
Okay.
That's what they negotiated with EPA on, right.
Can I ask another question, follow up?
Follow up?
And the other question that I had is, when we're talking about, because I know that you're saying that the permits, what we're talking about is stormwater, and then we're talking about sedimentation. So what we're talking about are, in essence, volume versus content of what's in water. So those complementary. So in other words, permitting, what you were talking about is, okay, some of this is redundant. We're already doing this. And from what I understand, and I could be wrong on this, is that there's going to be a change that will allow the information that you have, if you've done that work, or if the developer has done that work, and even though the EPA says you have to have 2 different permits, you only have to put that information by the end of the year into one, and it will satisfy both those, or is that not what I?
Well, we're asking permission from the EPA to condense from 2 permits down to 1.
Right.
Now, the NCGO one is a much more extensive,
Right.
it's 11 pages long.
Sure.
Versus the other one that we did a couple years ago in legislation was probably 2.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it requires a lot of information and a drawing of what you propose.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, yeah, that's why we're trying to do it is, okay, take one or the other, let's go with the extensive, got to do it anyways, so why not just streamline the operation and do it all at once?
Okay.
In 1 permit.
Okay.
One more?
One more question?
Yeah, one more question. So if we decide that, I know that the local governments can permit, and some of them do some of this permitting, but if we're telling the local folks that they can do this to the degree that they might end up doing it, and they're only, the licensing is only $100, is that going to be able to cover the amount of people, the amount of time, the amount of resources that the local folks are going to, and I know they have an option to do that, but now we're talking about doing this permitting on a local
Yeah.
that they might not be able to cover that.
Right. A couple of years ago, there's 53, 54 municipalities that have local programs. The rest, the other 200, some don't have. So everybody's going to be subject to the NCGO 1 now, whether you have a local program or not. The local programs generally are administered locally, and the other ones are administered by the state. So what it'll do is, just like you said, the locals will continue. We didn't change the fee. We reduced that, or we changed the fee down to $100, which basically a couple of years ago, if you remember, that means about 75% of the local communities could actually raise their fee up if they wanted to. Some of them had to bring it down. But so far, we haven't had any complaints about them not being able to do it. We put in here $200 now because now the NCGO 1 requires the state to get $100, and we're also allowing $100 to stay with the locals. So we're really not changing anything other than making an accommodation to cover all the fees where they go different places.
Representative Dahl.
So, I wish we could just go back and take this away, because I think we can fix some of these things. So now you're telling me now, I just want a clarification that we're no longer vying for the federal standards of 70% plus the 18 requirements. We're now going with the state requirements of the 80%.
Yes, that was something actually negotiated between DEQ and EPA, yeah. So
Okay.
that's what we're going with.
So we're going with that. Now, the NCGO 1 that covers vegetation and established vegetation, number one, I have a real issue with how to establish vegetation as far as straw and seed, because, and I'll be perfectly honest, in full disclosure, my wife loves grass, and so I have worked very hard on grass, and it is a pain. However, it can be done. But it depends on nature, it depends on water, it depends on a lot of things. And and hay and or straw and seed does not stop erosion at all. And the reason I'm strongly, I guess, opposed to any of this change is, in my neighborhood, we had some real problems with stormwater runoff, and the city was not willing to take care of it. And the land I spoke to you about this before, the land had already been sold, so it was in the homeowners, but the homeowners couldn't do it. And then we had, mulch going everywhere, and we didn't have enough, grass. And so I'm concerned that we're changing and or doing something that will actually harm. And I know that you don't want to harm the environment. I know that's not our goal here, but there are bad actors out there that have that goal in mind. So I want to be really careful that we've addressed specifically stormwater runoff and vegetation establishment. And I think that was a question, but I'm not really sure,
For a question.
because
Okay.
I kind of got off a little bit.
I'll tell you what, Representative Dahl, what's now being going to be the law of the land because of DEQ informed that this no longer is possible, that seed and straw is still going to be a method to start the grass, but in order to close out that permit, the grass actually has to grow, and it has to reach the 80% threshold. So your neighbor or whatever you got, now you're going to have to see somebody there watering the grass on a regular basis, and that permit will still be active. It's still active in the name of the person who originally pulled out the permit, which is generally the builder, unless there's a means by which the new owner takes over the permit, and then they're still going to be obligated. They might potentially be subject to a fine but from DEQ for not watering their grass. So whoever owns that permit is responsible. And that's why you see a lot of the national builders go with sod right away, because of the fact that they don't want to deal with that, get over with. Now, put in perspective, though, sod is very expensive. That's it. Oh yeah, okay, and then
Follow up?
Yeah.
Yep, follow up, okay.
So,
We're running out of time, so this is the last word.
okay, the stormwater and silt fencing, have you guys decided whether do you want the EPA to govern that, or do you want the state to govern that, or does the state need to ask the EPA, and can they legally ask the EPA?
Yeah, well, they can legally ask the EPA to do modifications on a regular basis, part of their agreement. So as far as what happens, the DEQ sets the standard that they've negotiated with EPA, and then that's what we're all subject to do. So we don't have the choice in saying, no, we don't want to do that, I don't care about the EPA. That's just federal law, and we got to comply with it.
Okay, so it's the bewitching hour. Do we have a motion? Mr. Representative Bradford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Make a motion for favorable report for PCS for House Bill 579, unfavorable to the original with referral to rules.
Thank you. We have a motion. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. We are adjourned.